The red-haired server, a deserter from the ranks of the sextons, a specialist in petty larcenies in the 28th Regiment, was doing his level best to conjure up in his memory the whole ritual, technique, and text of the Holy Mass. He was both server and prompter to the chaplain, who quite frivolously turned whole sentences upside down, and instead of getting to the ordinary Mass, found himself at that point of the prayer book where the Advent Mass came. He then began to sing this to the general satisfaction of the congregation. He had neither voice nor musical ear, and under the vaulting of the chapel there resounded such a squealing and caterwauling as could only be heard in a pigsty. "He's really well sozzled today," those sitting in front of the altar said with great joy and relish. "He isn't half oiled. He's been at it again. He must have got tight with some tarts somewhere." And now for about the third time the strains of Ita Missa Est rang out from the altar like a red Indian war whoop until the windows rattled. Then the chaplain looked once more into the chalice in case there should be a drop of wine left in it, made a gesture of annoyance, and addressed his listeners. "Well, now you can go home, you bastards. It's all over. I observe that you don't show that true piety you ought to have when you are in church in the presence of the Holy of Holies, you cads. When you're face to face with God Almighty, you're not ashamed to laugh aloud, cough and snigger, shuffle your feet, even in my presence, who represent here the Virgin Mary, Jesus Christ, and God the Father, you bloody imbeciles. If you do this again next time, you'll get the hell you deserve, and you'll learn that there's not only that hell which I preached to you about in my last sermon, but a hell on earth as well. And if you should by any chance save yourself from the first one, I'll see you don't escape from the second. Dismiss." The chaplain, who had just given such a wonderful practical demonstration of that damnable old custom, prison visiting, went into the vestry, changed his clothes, poured out some sacramental wine from the cask into a flagon, drank it up, and with the help of the red-haired server mounted his horse, which was tied up in the courtyard. Then he remembered Sweik, dismounted again, and went to the office to Judge Advocate Bernice. Judge Advocate Bernice was a man who liked society. He was an elegant dancer and a rake who was frightfully bored here and spent his time writing German verses for girls' autograph albums so as to have a supply always at hand. He was the most important element in the whole apparatus of military justice, and because he had such a tremendous pile of unfinished cases and muddled documents, he was held in respect by the whole military court on Hradčany. He kept losing the documents for the indictment and was compelled to invent new ones. He mixed up names, lost the threads of the indictments, and spun new ones just as they happened to come into his head. He tried deserters for theft and thieves for desertion. He brought in political cases which he had fabricated himself. He invented all kinds of hocus pocus to convict men of crimes they had never even dreamt of. He invented insults to the monarch and always attributed fabricated, incriminating statements to anyone if the indictment and informers' reports had got lost in the unending chaos of documents and official correspondence. "Hello," said the chaplain, shaking his hand. "How are you?" "Not very well," answered Bernice. "They've mucked up my papers and I can't make bloody head or tail of them. Yesterday I put up the material I'd processed on a fellow had up for mutiny, and they sent it back saying that in this case it wasn't a question of mutiny but of stealing a tin. And I'd taken the trouble to give it a completely different number, and it beats me how they managed to discover it." The judge advocate spat. "Are you still playing cards?" asked the chaplain. "I've lost everything I had at cards. The last time it happened I was playing Makow with that bald-headed colonel, and I had to throw everything I'd got down his bloody maw. But I know of a nice young bird. And what are you doing, Holy Father?" "I need a Batman," said chaplain. "Last time I had an old bookkeeper without academic education, but a prize bastard. He kept on sniveling and praying that God would save him, and so in the end, I drafted him off to the front with a march battalion. They say it was cut to pieces. Then they sent me a little chap who did nothing but sit in the pub and drink at my expense. He was quite a tolerable cove, but had sweaty feet, so I drafted him off too. Today, when I was preaching, I found a bastard who started blubbing just for fun. That's the kind of cove I need. He's called Sweik and sits in number 16. I'd like to know why they put him there and whether it wouldn't be possible somehow to arrange for me to get him out." The judge advocate started looking in the drawers for the files on Sweik, but as usual, he couldn't find anything. "Captain Linhart will have them," he said after a long search. "God knows where all these files of mine get to. I must have sent them to Linhart. I'll telephone to him at once. Hello, it's Lieutenant Bernice speaking, sir. Please, have you by any chance some files about a man called Sweik? They must be with me? I'm surprised. I took them over from you? Well, I'm very surprised. He's at present in number 16. I know, sir, that I've got the number 16 file with me. But I thought the Sweik's papers must be lying around somewhere in your tray. You'd be glad if I didn't speak to you in that tone. Papers don't lie around in your tray. Hello, hello." Bernice sat down at the table and angrily condemned the disorderly way that the investigations were being carried out. There was a long-standing feud between him and Captain Linhart, in which they were both very consistent. If Bernice got hold of papers belonging to Linhart, he arranged them in a way that no one could make head or tail of them. Linhart did exactly the same with papers belonging to Bernice, and of course they lost each other's enclosures. 30% of the people who sat in the garrison jail went on sitting there throughout the whole war without once being brought up for interrogation. Author's note. The papers on Sweik were not found until after the war. They were in the archives of the Army Legal Department and were minuted. Planned to throw off his hypocritical mask and come out publicly against our ruler and our state. The papers had been stuck into files dealing with a certain Yosef Kudela. On the file cover was a cross, and underneath it, action completed, with the date. So I've lost Sweik, said Bernice. I'll have him sent for, and if he doesn't confess to anything, I'll let him go and have him drafted to you, and you can settle it with his regiment. After the chaplain had gone, Bernice had Sweik brought before him, but left him standing at the door because he had just received a telephone message from police headquarters that the material which was required for prosecution document number 7267 about infantryman Maxner had arrived in office number 1 and been signed for by Captain Linhart. Meanwhile, Sweik inspected the judge advocate's office. One could not say that it made a very favorable impression, especially the photographs on the walls. They were photographs of various executions carried out by the army in Galicia and Serbia. They were artistic photographs of charred cottages and trees with branches sagging under the weight of bodies strung up on them. Particularly fine was a photograph from Serbia of a whole family strung up, a small boy and his father and mother. 2 soldiers with bayonets were guarding the tree, and an officer stood victoriously in the foreground, smoking a cigarette. On the other side, in the background, a field kitchen could be seen in full operation. Well, what's the trouble with you, Sweik? Asked Bernice when he filed away the telephone message. What have you been up to? Are you going to confess or wait until a charge is brought against you? It can't go on like this. Don't imagine that you're before a court where you'll be tried by lunatic civilians. Ours are courts-martial, the imperial and royal military court. The only way you can save yourself from a severe and just punishment is to confess. Bernice had a special method when he had lost the material against the accused. As you can see, there was nothing special about it, and so we need not be surprised if the results of such an examination and cross-questioning always amounted to nix. And Bernice felt he was always so clairvoyant that without having any material against the accused and without knowing what he was accused of or why he was imprisoned in the garrison jail, but simply by observing the behavior and physiognomy of the man who had been brought before him for interrogation, he could deduce why they had imprisoned him. His clairvoyance and knowledge of human nature was so great that a gypsy who was sent by his regiment to the garrison jail for stealing a few dozen shirts — he was helping the storekeeper in a store — was accused by him of political crimes. Allegedly, he had spoken in a pub somewhere with some soldiers about the setting up of an independent national state made up of the lands of the Bohemian Crown and Slovakia and ruled by a Slav king. We have material evidence, he said to the unfortunate gypsy. There's nothing left for you but to confess in which pub you said it, which regiment those soldiers came from, who listened to you, and when it took place. The unfortunate gypsy invented not only the date, but the pub and the regiment which his alleged listeners came from, and when he left the interrogation, he ran away from the garrison altogether. So you won't confess to anything, said Bernice, when Sweik remained deathly silent. You won't say why you're here and why they've put you in jail? You could at least have told me before I tell you it myself. I warn you once more that you'd better confess. It will be easier for you because it helps the investigation and alleviates the punishment. In that respect, it's just the same here as in a civil court. Humbly report, sir, Sweik popped up good-naturedly. I am here in garrison jail because I'm a foundling. What do you mean by that? Humbly report, sir, I can explain it quite simply. In our street, there's a coal merchant, and he had an entirely innocent 2-year-old little boy. This laddie once walked all the way from Vinharedi to Liban, where a policeman found him sitting on the pavement. So he took him to the police station and locked him up there. A 2-year-old child. The little boy was, as you see, quite innocent, and yet he was locked up. And if he'd been able to speak and anyone had asked him why he was locked up there, he wouldn't have known either. And it's rather like that with me. I'm a foundling, too. The keen gaze of the judge advocate passed swiftly over Sweik's figure and face and foundered on them. Such unconcern and innocence radiated from the whole of the being which stood before him that Bernice began to pace nervously up and down his office, and if he had not given his word to the chaplain, God knows what might have happened to Sweik. Finally, he came to a standstill again by his table. "Listen," he said to Sweik, who was gazing unconcernedly in front of him. "If ever I meet you again, you'll never forget it. Take him away!" When they took Sweik back to number 16, Bernice had staff warder Slavik called before him. "Until further orders," he said laconically, "Sweik is sent to Chaplain Katz for his disposal. Prepare his discharge papers and have him escorted to the chaplain by 2 men. Is he to be put in handcuffs for the journey, sir?" The judge advocate banged his fist on the table. "You're an oaf. I told you quite distinctly to make his discharge papers out." In all the bile which had accumulated in the judge advocate's soul in the course of that day because of Captain Linhart and Sweik poured out like a wild torrent on the head of the staff warder. At the end of it, Bernice said, "And now do you understand that you are a prize royal oaf?" This is something which should only be said to kings and emperors, but even this simple staff warder, who was no royal personage, was not very pleased about it. On his way back from the judge advocate's office, he gave a cruel kicking to a prisoner on fatigue duty who was cleaning the corridor. As for Sweik, the staff warder made up his mind that he must spend at least 1 night more in the garrison jail so as to derive a little more benefit from it. The night spent in the garrison jail will always rank among Sweik's most affectionate memories. Next to number 16 was the Black Hole, a murky pit for solitary confinement from which could be heard during that night the howls of a soldier whose ribs were being broken by Sergeant Major Repa at the orders of Staff Warder Slavik because of a disciplinary offense. When the howling stopped, there could be heard in number 16 the smashing of lice which got in between the fingers of the prisoners during their search. Above the doors, in an aperture in the wall, a paraffin lamp fitted with a protective grill emitted a feeble light and smoked. The smell of paraffin mingled with the natural exhalations of unwashed human bodies and the stench of the bucket, which every time it was used had its surface stirred up and added a new wave of stink to number 16. The bad food made the digestive process difficult for everyone, and the majority suffered from wind, which they released into the stillness of the night, answering each other with these signals to the accompaniment of various witticisms. The bad food made the digestive process difficult for everyone, and the majority suffered from wind, which they released into the stillness of the night, answering each other with these signals to the accompaniment of various witticisms. In the corridors could be heard the measured tread of the sentries. From time to time, the aperture in the door opened and a warder peered through the peephole. From the middle bunk could be heard a voice quietly saying, "Before I tried to escape and before they brought me here among you, I was in number 12. There they keep the light cases. Once they brought in a chap from somewhere in the country. The good fellow had got 14 days because he allowed soldiers to stay overnight with him. At first they thought that it was a plot, but then it turned out that he did it for money. He should have been locked up among the lightest cases, but because it was full there he came to us. And you can't imagine all the things he brought with him from home and what they sent him, because he somehow got permission to order his own food and make things cozy for himself. And he got permission to smoke. He had 2 hams, giant loaves of bread, eggs, butter, cigarettes. Well, in short, he had in his 2 knapsacks everything you could dream of. And the bastard thought that he must guzzle it all up himself. We started begging him to share it with us, when he didn't hit on the idea himself like others did when they got something. But he was a mean bastard and said no, he'd be locked up for 14 days and the cabbage and rotten potatoes, which they gave us for mess rations, would ruin his stomach. He said he'd give us all his mess rations and army bread. It wasn't worth having, and we could share it among ourselves or have it in turns. I tell you that he was such a gent that he didn't even want to sit on the bucket and waited until the next day for the exercise hour so that he could do it in the latrine in the courtyard. He was so spoiled that he even brought his own toilet paper. We told him that we didn't care a damn about his rations, and we braved it out 1, 2, 3 days. The bastard guzzled ham, spread butter on his bread, shelled his eggs. In short, he lived like a pig in clover. He smoked cigarettes and wouldn't give anyone even a puff. He said that we weren't allowed to smoke, and if the warder were to see him giving us a puff, they'd lock him up. As I said, we stood it for 3 days, but on the 4th day in the night, we did it. The bastard woke up early, and I forgot to tell you that in the early morning, at noon, and in the evening, before he began to stuff himself, he always prayed and prayed for a very long time, and so this time he prayed and then looked for his knapsacks under his bunk. Yes, the knapsacks were there, but they were dried up and shrunk like dried prunes. He began to shriek that he had been robbed and that we'd only left him his toilet paper. And then for about 5 minutes he thought that we were only joking and that we had hidden it somewhere. He said still quite merrily, "I know you're only teasing. I know you'll give it back to me, but it was neatly done." There was a chap among us from Liban, and he said, "Look, cover yourself with your blanket and count up till 10, and then look in your knapsacks." And he covered himself and counted 1, 2, 3 like an obedient little boy. And then the chap from Liban said again, "You mustn't do it so quickly. You must do it very slowly." And there he was under the blanket, counting slowly at intervals, 1, 2, 3. And when he got to 10, he climbed out of his bunk and looked into his knapsacks. "Jesus Mary, chaps," he began hollering. "They're just as empty as they were before." And all the time his face was so bloody silly that we could all have split our sides with laughter. And then that chap from Liban went on, "Try once more." And believe me, he was so crazy after all this that he tried again. And when he saw that there was still nothing there except toilet paper, he began to bang on the door and to shout out, "They've robbed me! They've robbed me! Help! Open, for Christ's sake, open!" And then they all came rushing in and called the staff warder and Sergeant Major Repa. We all said with one voice that he had gone mad, that the day before he gorged far into the night and guzzled everything up. But he just wept and kept on saying, "Surely there must be some crumbs left somewhere." And then they started looking for the crumbs and couldn't find any because we were quite clever too. What we had not been able to guzzle ourselves, we sent to rope post up to the second story. They couldn't prove anything on us, although that stupid fool kept on with his, "But surely there must be some crumbs left." The whole day he ate nothing and looked carefully to see whether anyone ate or smoked anything. And at lunch the next day he didn't touch his rations. But in the evening the rotten potatoes and cabbage seemed to appeal to him. Only he didn't pray as much as he did when he used to tuck into his ham and eggs. Then one of us somehow got some fags from outside, and then he began talking to us for the first time, asking us to give him a puff, but we didn't give him anything. "I was afraid you'd give him a puff," remarked Sweik. "That would have spoiled the whole story. You only find noble actions like that in novels, but in the garrison jail in such circumstances, it would be sheer lunacy." "And you didn't give him the blanket treatment?" someone asked. "We didn't think of it." Then a discussion began in hushed tones as to whether he should have had the blanket treatment or not. The majority were for it. The conversation gradually died out. They were falling asleep, scratching themselves under their armpits, on their chests, and on their bellies. At those points in their underclothes where the lice congregated most, they went to sleep, drawing the lice-ridden blankets over their heads, so that the light of the paraffin lamp shouldn't disturb them. At 8 o'clock in the morning, they called Sweik to go to the office. "On the left-hand side of the door leading into the office, there's a spittoon, and they throw fag-ends into it," one man informed Sweik. "And on the first floor, you'll pass another one. They don't sweep the passages till 9 o'clock, so something may still be there." But Sweik disappointed their hopes. He never came back to number 16. The 19 pairs of pants made various deductions and conjectures about him. A freckled soldier belonging to the Landwehr, who had a very lurid imagination, spread the news that Sweik had shot his captain and would be led away the same day to the drill ground at Motol for execution. Sweik, Batman to the chaplain. Sveik's odyssey began anew under the honorable escort of 2 soldiers with fixed bayonets who had to conduct him to the chaplain. His escort were men who complemented each other. If one was lanky, the other was small and tubby. The lanky one limped with his right foot and the small tubby one with his left. Both served behind the lines because sometime before the war they had been totally exempted from military service. They walked solemnly alongside the pavement and from time to time looked sideways at Sweik, who strode in the middle and saluted everyone he saw. His mufti and the military cap he got when he joined up had got lost in the garrison stores. Before they discharged him, they had given him an old military uniform which had belonged to some pot-bellied fellow who was taller than him by a head. As for the trousers, 3 more Sweiks could have gotten into them. An endless succession of baggy folds from his feet up to where his trousers reached over his chest involuntarily evoked the admiration of the spectators. A vast tunic with patches on the elbows, covered with grease and dirt, dangled around Sweik like a coat on a scarecrow. His trousers hung on him like a circus clown's costume. The military cap, which they had also changed in the garrison jail, came down over his ears. Sweik answered the smiles of the spectators with a sweet smile of his own and the warm, tender look of his good-natured eyes, and so they marched to the chaplain's apartment at Carlin. The first of the two to speak to Sweik was the small, tubby one. They were just at that moment in Malestrana down under the arcades. "Where do you come from?" asked the small, tubby one. "From Prague." "And you're not going to run away?" Now the lanky one joined the conversation. It is a very remarkable phenomenon that people who are small and fat are generally good-humored optimists, whereas people who are lanky and spindly are, on the contrary, skeptics. And so the lanky one said, "He'd run away if he could." "But why should he?" replied the small, tubby one. "Now he's out of the garrison jail, he's practically free. I'm carrying it in the bundle here." "What's in that bundle for the chaplain?" asked the lanky one. "I don't know." "There, you see, you don't know, and yet you talk about it." They crossed the Charles Bridge in complete silence. In Charles Street, the small, tubby one spoke to Sweik again. "Do you know why we're taking you to the chaplain?" "For confession," said Sweik nonchalantly. "Tomorrow they're going to hang me. This is what they always do on these occasions, and they call it spiritual consolation." "And why are they going to?" the lanky one asked cautiously, while the tubby one looked pityingly at Sweik. Each was a small tradesman from the country, a paterfamilias. "I don't know," replied Sweik with his good-natured smile. "I haven't the faintest idea. It must be fate." "Perhaps you were born under an unlucky star," remarked the little fellow with a knowing air and in sympathy. "At home in Jasina near Josefov, during the war with Prussia, they hanged someone just like that. They came to fetch him, didn't say anything to him, and hanged him in Josefov." "If you ask me," said the lanky one skeptically, "they don't hang a person for nothing at all. There must always be some reason for it, so they can justify it." "When there isn't a war on," remarked Sweik, "they justify it, but when there is, they don't worry about you. You could just as well fall at the front or be hanged at home. 6 of one or half a dozen of the other." "I say, you're not a political, are you?" asked the lanky one. The tone of his question indicated that he was beginning to take to Sweik. "Yes, I'm much too political," replied Sweik with a smile. "You aren't a National Socialist?" Now it was the turn of the small, tubby one to start being cautious. Breaking in on the conversation, he said, "What's that got to do with us anyway? There are lots of people around everywhere, and they're watching us. If we could only take off our bayonets in a passage somewhere without attracting attention." "You won't run away from us, will you? We'd have trouble if you did. Aren't I right, Tonik?" he said to the lanky one, who answered quietly, "We could take off our bayonets. After all, he's one of us." He ceased being a skeptic, and his heart filled with compassion for Sweik. They looked for a suitable passage where they could take off their bayonets, and the tubby one allowed Sweik to walk alongside him. "You'd like a smoke, wouldn't you?" he said. "I wonder whether," he wanted to say, I wonder whether they allow you to have a smoke before they hang you." But he did not complete the sentence, realizing that it might be tactless. They all had a smoke, and Sweik's escort began to tell him about their families in the country near Hereditch Kralov, their wives and children, their plot of land, and their cow. "I'm thirsty," said Sweik. The lanky one and the small, tubby one exchanged glances. "We might drop in somewhere for a quick one," said the little fellow, feeling he could count on the lanky one's consent. "But somewhere where it won't attract attention." "Let's go to Kuklik," Sweik suggested. "You can put your rifles in the kitchen there. The landlord, Sarabona, is a Sokol, and you don't need to be afraid of him." "They play the violin and the accordion there," continued Sweik, "and tarts come in, and various other members of good society who aren't allowed in at the Representak." The lanky one and the small one exchanged glances once more, and then the lanky one said, "Very well then, let's go. It's still a long way to Carlin." On the way, Sweik told them various stories, and they arrived at Kuklik in a good mood, and did exactly as Sweik had advised. They put their rifles in the kitchen and went into the bar, where the violin and accordion filled the room with the strains of the popular song. At Pencratch, there's a hill, and on that hill there stands a lovely row of trees. A young lady who was sitting on the knees of a jaded youth with smoothly parted hair was singing in a hoarse voice, "I had a girl lined up and now another's pinched her." At one table, a drunken sardine hawker was asleep. He woke up from time to time, struck the table with his fist, stuttered out, "It's no good," and fell asleep again. Under a mirror behind the billiard table sat 3 other young ladies who shouted at a railway guard, "Young man, stand us a glass of vermouth." Near the orchestra, 2 people were quarreling about whether Marka had been caught the previous night by the patrol or not. One of them saw it with his own eyes, and the other maintained that she had gone to bed with a soldier at the Hotel U Valsu. By the door, a soldier was sitting with a number of civilians and telling them how he had been wounded in Serbia. He had a bandaged arm and his pockets were full of cigarettes they had given him. He said that he couldn't drink anymore, but one of the company, a bald-headed old man, kept on offering him something. "Have another, soldier. Who knows if we'll ever meet again? Shall I get them to play something for you? Do you like the orphan child?" This was the bald-headed old man's favorite song, and sure enough, presently the violin and accordion started to wail it out, while tears came into his eyes, and he started to sing in a tremulous voice. "When it grew to wiser years, it asked about its mama. It asked about its mama." From the other table, somebody said, "Stop it, can't you? Go and stuff it up. String yourself up on a hook. Get to bloody hell with your orphan child." And as a final trump, the rival table began to sing, to part, it breaks my heart, my heart." "Franta," they called to the wounded soldier when they had outsung and drowned the orphan child. "Leave them and come sit with us. They can go to hell. You come and bring the cigarettes here. You won't amuse those mugs." Sweik conjured up memories of the time when he often used to sit here before the war. The police inspector Drasner used to raid the place, and the prostitutes were scared of him and made up songs about him, full of double entendres. He remembered how once they sang in a chorus, "When Drasner made his raid, Morena was afraid." When Drasner made his raid, Morena wasn't afraid, and all the hullabaloo, she'd knocked back quite a few. Just at that moment, who should have come in but the terrible and ruthless Drasner himself, accompanied by his men. It was like shooting into a flock of partridges. The plainclothes police herded all the people together in a bunch, and Sweik found himself in it too, because with his usual bad luck, he had said to Inspector Drasner when he was asked to show his papers, "Have you got permission for this from police headquarters?" Sweik also remembered a poet who used to sit there under the mirror and in the general uproar of Kuklik amidst the strains and sounds of the accordion used to write poems and recite them to the prostitutes. On the other hand, Sveik's escort had no such reminiscences. For them it was a quite new experience, and they began to like it. The first who found complete satisfaction here was the small tubby one, because people of his type tend to be not only optimists, but epicures. The lanky one struggled with himself for a short time, and just as he had already lost his skepticism, so he now began gradually to lose his self-control and the rest of his good sense also. "I'm going to have a dance," he said after his 5th beer, when he saw how couples were dancing the slapak. The little one abandoned himself completely to dissipation. A young lady sat next to him and told him dirty stories. His eyes sparkled. Sweik drank. The lanky one finished his dance and returned with his partner to the table. Then they sang, danced, drank without interruption, and spanked their lady companions. And in the atmosphere of venal love, nicotine and alcohol, there was ever present, if barely perceptible, the old slogan, "Après nous de déluge." In the afternoon, a soldier came up to them and offered them a boil with blood poisoning for 5 guilders. He had with him a hypodermic syringe and could inject paraffin into their legs or arms. This is a fairly well-proved method of getting into hospital, but the smell of the paraffin which remains in the boil gives it away. Petrol is better because it evaporates quicker. Subsequently, a mixture of ether and petrol used to be injected, and later other improvements were introduced. Author's note. With this, they would be in bed for at least 2 months, and if they fed the wound with saliva, they could perhaps spin it out to half a year and be completely discharged from the army.